This is the Cover 3 Tailgate. And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live at youtube.com/cover3 and everywhere you get your podcasts on demand. Thanks for hanging out. Smash that subscribe, smash that like, and come and join us in the chat, aka the Cover 3 Tailgate, where, yeah, there are some conversations, not just about who might have the toughest schedules in the entire country, but even more specific, because we're going to be going all across the country. We want to know some of the toughest schedules in the Big Ten, in the SEC, the ACC, and yes, even in some of the Group of Five conferences. Also, as you might see from the headline here, we want to see some of the easiest schedules that we've got from across college football. Tom, how we doing? I missed you last week a lot. I gotta say that, here's the thing. When I'm away, I don't have full access to my cell phone. I do have some.
You get your 1 hour of yard time a day.
I have my computer lab time. And in the computer lab, I am able to access twitter.com, X, whatever we like to call it. And you shared something on there that, kind of got me excited about the college football season ahead, because what we had last week and what we haven't really gotten a chance to discuss here is that we have finalized the postseason schedule for the 2024-2025 season. We have the exact times and dates for all of the college football playoff schedule, the bracket. We have all of the bowl games, except for one, still waiting on you, Holiday Bowl, just a little TBD. But what we have is a real look at what the new postseason future of the sport is going to be. It includes some big-time changes, including the fact that on Saturday, December 14th, we will be doing our patriotic duty of taking the under in Army-Navy, but we're also going to have the Celebration Bowl and then the Camellia Bowl in the nightcap. So the bowl season's going to start right as the official regular season is ending. And, of course, from December 14th all the way to January 20th, when we crown a national championship in the College Football Playoff National Championship game, all the bowls game split up in lots of different ways. We've got a Mayo Bowl appearance on January 3rd. Just sort of as you start to see it all laid out, what are some of your initial reactions or thoughts about what it's going to be like with this new kind of postseason?
Excitement and also terror in that you mentioned the bowl season starts sooner than ever. Like it's the same weekend as the Army-Navy game. We will have bowl games, which means I have one fewer week to write the bowl rankings.
Oh, that's right. We do have to operate from the perspective of Tom Fornelli, which has to rank every single bowl game for the entire postseason. Yes.
Yeah, it's like at least in previous years, I would have time to actually kind of slowly do it and then procrastinate a little bit, but then on the last day, write the last 80 games. But, get a couple done during the week before. Don't have that this week or this year, so that's going to be scary. But other than that, I'm ashamed to admit that when they released the playoff schedule, I was excited. I got pumped for it, and all of our viewers and listeners know how I feel about the college football playoff expansion. But I've also maintained I was always going to watch this expanded playoff, and my problem is not with a 12-team playoff as much as it's always been with the focus on the playoff in this sport and just money in general and how that all works and how it drives everything. But when I saw that schedule and I saw the Friday night game and then the 3 games on Saturday, and then it's just, it's hard not to get a little bit excited about it because it is just a television event, but it's probably going to be a pretty good television event. So I'm pumped.
So I think the biggest winner, or one of the winners, and one of my takeaways is that the bowl games between the first round and the quarterfinals are going to feel different because those first quarterfinals are going to punch you in the face I mean, you ain't going to be ready for them. So,
Mhm.
as we mentioned, Celebration Bowl, Camellia Bowl, that's on Saturday the 14th. We come around on the Tuesday, got 2 bowls on Tuesday, 1 Wednesday, 1 Thursday. Then on Friday, as you mentioned, we go Friday, December 20th, we go 12 o'clock bowl, 3:30 bowl, playoff game. Then on that Saturday the 21st, 12, 4, 8 games of significance for the national championship. Win and continue, lose, and your season is done. We have not had stakes like that on December 20th and December 21st in my time of covering college football. And like you might be able to stretch this and say this is the first time in modern college football history that we've had. I mean, you don't even have hot seat coaches coaching on 20th and 21st. Like, this is going to punch you in the face in terms of the intensity and the quality that you're going to get. And then you're going to come off that and you get delivered a fantastic next week where you get 2 games on the 23rd, Hawaii Bowl back in its natural position on the 24th, 3 games on the 26th, 4 on the 27th, and then 1 week later, 8 daggum bowl games on the 28th. And so as I'm looking at it, like those first round games, on campus environments, first of its kind, it's going to like get you so jazzed up. And then everything that comes between that and the quarterfinals around on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, I feel like those games are really going to be benefited, where a lot of college football fans kind of checked out maybe a little bit. And so this is going to be one benefit where people said playoff expansion killed the bowls. I will say in this one specific perspective, I think the way the playoff calendar is laid out is going to make games like the Alamo Bowl. It's going to make games like the Independence Bowl, like the Pop-Tarts Bowl. It's going to make those games, you're going to be a little bit more in rhythm to get fired up for them.
Hey, you got everything balances out in the universe. Like, you got to take the good with the bad and the bad with the good. Like, you look at this schedule, and at first you're excited because the Hawaii Bowl is back on Christmas Eve where it belongs. And, when you're sitting at your sister's house on Christmas Eve with the family, it's nice to have a Hawaii Bowl on the TV to watch. But the bad is, as you mentioned, like with those games being played on the 20th, it is like the earliest in the postseason we've had, games of consequence. But I worry about the unintended consequences of that, in that you look at rivalry week, maybe the expanded college football playoff doesn't kill the bowls as much as it kills some rivalry games. Because if you're a team with it's like, say you're, 10-1 or whatever going into that last week, or 9-2, and you've got some injuries and you don't really have the time off like you would in the previous format, where after the season ends, you get about a month before you got to play your semifinal. Now you've got 2 weeks, maybe even only a week after the SEC championship game or the Big Ten championship game, if you're playing in that. I think you're going to start seeing teams rest players in the rivalry games at the end of the regular season. They're not going to opt out of bowl games anymore, but I think you're going to see some guys who are just dealing with an injury, who maybe they would have played through it before, are going to be told to rest and sit this one out, so that way they can get fresh for the playoff run.
We have truly enlightened college football fans in the Cover 3 tailgate. They are the cream of the crop, because Richard at 8:46 a.m., well before the show started, had a question along these lines. Richard jumped in, cracked a cold one, and asked, with deeper conferences, parentheses, Big Ten, SEC, and more playoff games, do you think teams use more of a pitch count / snap count to manage their roster? Will depth at key positions define this new era?
Yes.
Yeah.
Depth is, that's part of the idea of the roster limits that we've heard floated around now, that, we're going to be like with all the rule changes in the NCAA versus House and blah, blah, blah. You're hearing roster limit discussion brought up for this very reason, because depth is going to be important. And with the transfer portal, like, you kind of want to keep some of these schools from hoarding, like going all Bear Bryant way back in the day, where he's got like 1,000 players on the team, or Tom Osborne at Nebraska, where they've got like 1,000 players on the team, because depth is going to be huge. And it's something we see it in the NFL every year. Like, you get to the playoffs, and one of the things, like, NFL is the NFL, and it's king no matter what. Like, you and I could be out there, as long as they slap an NFL shield on our helmets, people will watch it. But you see, like, every year these teams get to the playoffs and they're beat to hell. Like, a lot of the key players are missing, and we've seen that starting in college football in recent years too. depth is going to be huge. Like I wrote for the site this morning, the top running back rooms in the country. And for me, it's something I kind of brought up in there, in that you're seeing teams with running backs where you can't, when you look at the playoff in recent years, there's always like, it's not coincidental that the teams with the best running backs, or the teams that are typically in the playoff, have really good running backs. But now it's going to be important to have 2 or 3 or 4 to spread the carries out through the regular season to keep those legs fresh, because at the end of the year, the goal is you're going to play at least 3 more games. Like if you want to win a national title, or maybe 4 if you have to go through the at-large spot. So yeah, like injuries are going to decide the national championship a lot. I think you're going to see a lot of cases where key players go down and you get to the final rounds, the semis, and the title game, and maybe there's a backup quarterback in there. Maybe we've got Cardale Jones kind of situations going on, or maybe some of the stud guys are just hurt. So yeah, depth is it's always been important. It's even going to be more important now.
Can I offer a galaxy brain thought here? If you are Lane Kiffin and you are in a position where if you win the Egg Bowl, you make the SEC championship game, and that would be the first SEC championship game appearance in the championship game era, which goes back to 1992. But if, and I don't know how this would happen, but again, it's a hypothetical, or you could rest your starters, potentially lose the Egg Bowl, but remain third place in the SEC, where an advantage would be more rest for your starters, and you don't have to play in the SEC championship game, potentially taking a very bad loss. Would you, in this hypothetical, as Lane Kiffin, would you try to make history and risk getting a potential blowout L and be right on the cutting edge? Or if Jackson Dart's even maybe Jackson Dart all of a sudden has an ankle, right? Because what 23-year-old quarterback or 24-year-old quarterback isn't liable to have an ankle at some point? What would you do?
Well, I'm built different, Chip, so I would play every single game no matter what. But I don't know. These are going to be things that coaches have to figure out when it comes to season roster game management. And I don't want to whatever on it, but this is one of the unintended consequences of expansion that we're going to have to deal with, where we needed to make the bowl games matter to keep players from opting out of them. And now by doing what we've done, we're creating situations where players are going to be opting out of the regular season, while we argue that the regular season will still matter. So I don't know, man. Like, that situation is going to arise somewhere, and a coach is going to have to make a decision. But for me, you have to weigh the pros and cons of, yeah, I could skip out on the SEC title game and still get in an at-large. But if my goal is to win the national title, it is much easier to do that with a first-round bye than it will be as an at-large having to play in the first round, especially because if you're the third team in the SEC and you lose the Egg Bowl in your scenario, you're probably not getting a home game for that first-round game. You're probably going to be going on the road. So you're making things far more difficult. So I think that my approach would be, I'm going to play to win the game. I'm going to try to win the conference, and that way I can get the bye, and then we'll see how it shakes out, because it's going to be really hard no matter what. So I got to try to make it I got to try to give myself every possible advantage I can.
So fundamentally, that's where I am too, is that I don't want there to be a pervasive attitude in our locker room that we are punting on anything. This ain't no 82 game season. Like, we only get so many chances to go out there and compete. You spend all year, and we're not punting on a single down. Like, we are going out there, and that is what I'm going to set in my locker room. Now, if it is a conversation about your quarterback and an injury that could be like greatly improved, then perhaps you hope that you've got a second quarterback that you believe in. But I would not rest starters the way that we see NFL teams rest starters in the final week of the regular season with the playoffs clinched and nothing to play for. I would not do anything close to that if I was a head coach in the modern era.
One of the more interesting juggling acts we might see is if you're competing for a playoff bid, and you're playing, it's early October, you're playing a conference game, and you're up like 20 in the early fourth quarter. Maybe now, do you rest your starters because you're trying to limit reps to keep them fresh for possible playoff run later? Or are you going to keep them in games like that to kind of run up the score to improve your resume and your chance of getting in the playoffs? So it's going to be a balancing act, I think, what coaches are going to have to figure out. And I think it'll take a few years for people to really figure out what they have to do in those situations. Like people are going to try stuff and then they're either going to be rewarded or burned by it. And people will make their decisions based off of that in the future. But it's something we have to consider now. Like you might see, because it will be beneficial in some areas to get your reserves, your your twos and your threes, a lot more snaps during the season in case you do need them in a spot like that. So you're going to see a lot of backups playing, I think, in the third and fourth quarter of games in the regular season.
There was I apologize if I've mentioned this before, but I remember noticing around 2017, 2018 that the way that Clemson was handling injuries mid-season was very different.
Mm-hmm.
And, you'd get the sense that Dexter Lawrence has a quad. And if the national championship was going on, then he'd play. But that staff was thinking, we need him. We've got that 15 game kind of mindset. We're trying to compete for a national championship here. And this is the benefit of the way they were recruiting at the time and really still are, but we also have dudes. We also have a lot of bodies that we can get in there. And, your Austin Bryants, get in there, some of those 3-4 year guys that end up playing a big role in that.
I'll say this, you bring up Clemson as an example there. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if I was some schools and maybe I was playing in the ACC, I would consider being in the ACC an advantage in that, why Clemson was able to give him time off when he's dealing with a quad? Because they were so much better than everybody in the league that they were able to do it. And they were probably still going to win their games. Whereas teams in the SEC and the Big Ten, I don't know. We're going to be talking about difficult schedules here later in the show, Chip. I don't know if you've noticed in your list which two conferences kind of really pervade the top of the list as far as the most difficult schedules. Those teams really won't have the choice to rest guys for an easy game off. So I don't know what schools need to hear this, but maybe being in the ACC or the Big 12, if you're a team that thinks you're going to compete for national titles and expect to get to the playoff every year, maybe that's better for you in the long run than joining the Big 10 or the SEC. Again, I'm not pointing anybody out in particular here, just a hypothetical.
I don't know who needs to hear this. We'll get to those toughest schedules in just a little bit. One more, bit of news from over the weekend. You were ranking the running back rooms, the best in the country. Looked earlier. It does look like that story is live now on CBSSports.com. If you want to go check that out and tell Tom how smart he is and how all of his opinions are correct. LSU needed a little depth. And so we get some of that with the return of John Emery, the running back who in the 2019 cycle, one of the top rated running backs in the class, just a phenomenal talent. But man, the injuries have been really tough. Sometimes he was part of a rotation. It never really clicked for him. As you look at John Emery's return to an offense that has 2 first-round tackles, a quarterback that everyone here on the Cover 3 podcast is extremely excited about, in Garrett Nussmeier, running wide receivers like Kyron Lacy, CJ Daniels. Do you look at John Emery Jr.'s return to the LSU offense as like a missing piece, a depth piece? How does this get categorized for you?
I think it's got to be a depth piece. If I'm LSU, I don't know if I want to go into the year sitting there thinking I'm relying on John Emery, especially when he spent nearly the entire offseason in the portal looking for a new home before finally coming back. But you look at Emery, and like you mentioned, he was very highly rated out of high school. He hasn't quite lived up to it as far as production-wise, but it's not been entirely his fault because of health and injury concerns. But you look at the season he had last year, he only played in 7 games. He had 23 carries for 121 yards. Which, he averaged 5.3 yards per carry, but that's not exactly, bell cow kind of status. And that's basically yards per carry wise, I think last year was his best season as a player. He just didn't get nearly as many carries. And obviously Jaden Daniels was the running back on that team last year. But I think going back to what we're talking about with depth, going back, first of all, he's in the portal. He clearly, if he's ending up back at LSU, did not maybe get the kind of attention he was looking for in the portal from other programs. Didn't really find a landing spot that he liked. So he's back at LSU where he's could be. I mean, he's going to have an impact for them. He's going to be a guy, if he's healthy, he's going to get carries because it's not like he's a bad player. He's a good player. He's just not an elite player. So you look at that situation. You look at the fact that Jaden's gone. They're relying on Garrett Nussmeier. So there's going to be a lot more carries around because Nussmeier is not the runner that Jaden Daniels was. So he's going to get opportunities. He's going to be needed. If LSU wants to win the SEC and get to the playoff, they're going to have to share the load back there. And there's other guys in that room that he has to deal with. But I think he's got a role there. I think he's got a niche and a spot. So I think it's a very, very long way to get back to where he belonged in the first place.
Yeah, from Louisiana. He had some academic issues along the way. He will be in that room. Josh Williams, who I thought was serviceable, but even in big game breakdowns for LSU, I remember us asking, like, is this running game something that you can really rely on? And I remember Brian Kelly identifying that going into last year, that in those third and short, in those end goal situations, do they have the ability? And Emory is a physical runner. And so if he can be able to bring that physicality, then I see him, yes, as a depth piece, but as one that could be very important.
Also like a red zone kind of short yardage kind of piece too. Like he's got a role on that team. So it's like he'll be useful.
100%. Yeah, Josh Williams and Caleb Williams, not that Caleb Williams, rounding out that room. Caleb with a K. We'll see how much Caleb with a K gets run, and if that ends up being something that I have to keep coming back to. All right. Coming up on the other side, we're taking a look across the country, conference by conference, the toughest schedules for 2024 and the easiest, all that and more. Next.
Have you heard of semaglutides? Ozempic, Mounjaro?
Hartman, this could be dangerous. Let's do it.
South Park, The End of Obesity. New exclusive event, now streaming, exclusively on Paramount Plus.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast as we take a look at some of the most difficult schedules in the entire country heading into 2024. This is a good table setter because coming up next month is when we will actually be rolling through win totals. That's right. Every single team in a power conference is going to have a place where we run through, we break down the schedule, we give you our pick on the win total. And so being able to start to get a look at where teams that, hey, they're rating, your ranking, you might feel one way about them, but when it comes to making that win total, it can get a little bit more difficult. So we'll have some of these schools that we're talking about today that Tom's brought up, I brought up, that are going to be ones that are expected to compete, for conference championships, that are expected to potentially be in the mix to make a college football playoff. Others, not so much. We begin in the Big Ten, where, Tom, I will ask you, do you think that Purdue has the toughest schedule in the Big Ten?
I mean, probably. Like if you just look at it on paper, it's definitely certainly in the running because they play everybody. Like they've got Notre Dame in non-conference, right? Which is never fun, but it's still it's fun for us. But they're at Wisconsin. They get Oregon at home. They've got to go to Ohio State. They've got Penn State. Like if you were to rank, I mean, depending on your view of Michigan, I think Michigan's the third best team in the Big Ten. I know that we're kind of, supposed to be questioning them, but I think that doing what they do, they'll probably still be pretty good. But there's an argument to be made that Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon are the three best teams in the league, and sure, Purdue's got to play all of them. And then they've also got to play at Wisconsin. And then I mentioned the Notre Dame game, and they've also got a non-conference game at Oregon State. So, like, when you look, there's only one. I mean, if Oregon State, we're counting them as G5, I guess. There's only two G5 games, Oregon State and Indiana State. And I don't consider Oregon State G5 anymore, or yet. So
right.
That's going to be tough. If Purdue gets to a bowl game this year, like Ryan Walters is Big Ten Coach of the Year.
I like that. So I have identified, sometimes it's for me also about, where they go or the way that the schedule unfolds. Because in a calendar month from October 18th to November 16th, that is the run where they get Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State. And they do have Northwestern in there. But I feel like this is a season for Ryan Walters where there needs to be urgency against Nebraska. There needs to be urgency against Oregon State. Like there needs to be urgency against Illinois, because from roster fatigue for a group that got hit pretty hard in the portal, from the way that their depth is going to be tested against these teams that are just priming up to try to make a run in the college football playoff, like Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State. It's tough for me to imagine that month is going to be a very fun time for Boilermakers football.
Also, like, you look at that month, but what comes after it? Because you look at Michigan State and Indiana as games that Purdue can, compete for. They can win
Both
those
on the
games.
road.
But the problem is, they're both on the road, and both come after that run of games that you just mentioned with Oregon, Northwestern, Ohio State, Penn State. So by the time Purdue heads to East Lansing for that game in late November, they might be beat to shit. Like, there might not be anything left of that team, where you would look at those as coin flips, or slightly, on the road, less than coin flips, where now it's like you're looking at a 20-80 situation.
What are some of the other, before we get to easiest, because I actually think the easiest is quite unique in the Big Ten this year. What are some other tough schedules from the Big Ten in 2024?
The other team in the Big Ten that I would consider as having the best schedule, or the toughest schedule, would be UCLA. Because let me pull it up here real quick. Because I think UCLA and USC both got kind of, screwed a little bit, but they start at Hawaii, so you've got that long road trip to start in week 0. But it's also nice because it helps get
on CBS,
and Paramount Plus. But in your, then you come back. Your first home game is at Indiana, so your first home game of the season at the Rose Bowl is a conference game against Indiana, and it's Indiana UCLA. So there's all the basketball folks will be out there for that one. But then non-con at LSU. Oh, okay. So we're going to Tiger Stadium. What do we have next week? Oh, Oregon. Oregon's at home. Oh, okay. So the Ducks. Oh, that's tough. Let's see. What do we play? Oh, then we're on the road for Penn State. So that's a 3-week span with no bye at LSU, Oregon, at Penn State. No fun. Then after, their bye.
And just imagine the map. Okay. Maybe
Bing.
Bing, bing. Maybe we'll be able to throw this thing together, because you're right. You start in Hawaii, you come back to Los Angeles. That's cool. You go all the way to Baton Rouge, then back to Los Angeles to play the physical buzzsaw that is Oregon, then all the way to Pennsylvania to play Abdul Carter and Penn State, then all the way back to Los Angeles to row the boat with PJ Fleck, then all the way to Piscataway the very next week in New Jersey, then to Lincoln. Oh, no, you get a week off. Okay, then you get a week off. But that is just ping-ponging across this continental United, no, not even the continental, the whole United States.
Half the damn hemisphere, like the Western Hemisphere, you are going back and forth across it.
Deshaun Foster is platinum gold status. I mean, I know they fly charter, but UCLA, you need to, we can get corporate sponsors on the field now. If they don't have a Delta or American or Southwest or something on the field by the end of this season, UCLA is going to be the example of, will all of this cross-country travel that we're going to see in the new look conferences, what is the true toll that it's going to take? Because I'd say that is a brutal path for the Bruins here in 2024.
Yeah, and then you mentioned, after the Rutgers game, they get the bye, and then they're at Nebraska, but then they finish it again. No more byes here. Iowa, at Washington, USC, Fresno State.
Hey, well, at least they stay in the West Coast. They get through that bye, and then they played it in Nebraska, and then they at least get to stay in the Pacific time zone the rest of the way.
But you're finishing the year with a Fresno State team that could be like a Mountain West, contender. So it's there's no breath. You're just week after week, you're getting smacked in the face, and you don't have time to catch yourself. It's a really tough schedule.
One of the things that I was doing when I was doing my prep for this was to just take an objective strength of schedule rating and just kind of look where everybody's stacking up against each other, pluck a few other ones. Illinois showed up near the top. So I wanted to ask you specifically, do you think that it is even by an average power conference team standard, pretty tough schedule for the Illini?
Yeah, I think that if you look at this one, I don't think it's the toughest. I don't know if I would consider it the top 5 toughest in the league, because you do get Central Michigan and Eastern Illinois in your non-con, which is easier than a lot of teams that are dealing with in the Big Ten this year. You do have Kansas, but at least that's in Champaign. So that'll be a tough one. And then opening conference play with road trips to Nebraska and Penn State is not fun. You get a bye, then you get Purdue at home, which is a winnable game. But then, you've got Michigan, you're at Oregon. But after that, like the last third of that schedule, I think is filled with games that the Illini could win. So there are tough opponents in there, and contextually of comparing them to, Illinois, if you want to do power ratings, like a lot of those games are tough for Illinois. But that's the thing about the Big Ten. Nobody has an easy schedule. It's the
Mhm.
same thing with the SEC. Nobody has an easy schedule. Some are just easier than others. And when I look and I compare it with others, I don't think Illinois is a top 5 most difficult schedule in the league.
Yeah, another one that popped up in the strength of schedule ratings that I was not all the way in on was the idea that Washington has one of the tougher schedules in the Big Ten. Their non-conference, Weber State, Eastern Michigan, Washington State.
That's nothing.
It's tough for me to see in any monsters there. Then you get into conference play. They do play Michigan, a nice rematch of the national championship game a year ago. They do play Oregon, but no Ohio State there. They do play at Penn State. It is tough, yes, especially for a Washington team that lost, so many key pieces off last year's run. But compared to the average power conference, compared to the average Big Ten team, I can't say that Washington stood out as uniquely difficult, especially compared to like a Purdue or a UCLA.
No, and I think the one team where it does kind of stand out we haven't mentioned yet is USC.
Oh yeah, so you've got USC as one of the tougher schedules.
Yeah, because they start in Las Vegas against LSU, and they get Utah State as their home opener the next week, which is fine. They get a bye, but then their first Big Ten game is at Michigan. They follow that up with Wisconsin. Then they've got a road trip to Minnesota. So again, we're kind of doing the same thing we were with UCLA. We're flying back and forth. Then you get Penn State at home. You're flying across the country from Maryland. You get Rutgers at home. Then you get Washington on the road, Nebraska at home, UCLA, and you finish the year with Notre Dame. So you look at their non-conference, it's LSU, Utah State, Notre Dame. Not easy. Then in conference, you've got Michigan State on the road. You've got Penn State at home. You've got Washington on the road. So it's not the toughest, but I think that's third or fourth at worst in the league.
Okay. So then I was looking for the easiest. I went to go tackle the other side. And I like you mentioned, power ratings are going to throw a lot of Big Ten and SEC teams. They're going to say all of them have hard schedules because they all have to play each other. But if you were to put it in like a scatter plot, the outlier on the easy side is the Rutgers Scarlet Knights.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so surprising to me because so often we say a team like Rutgers has a tougher schedule because Rutgers cannot play Rutgers.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true. Rutgers cannot play Rutgers. And yet they find themselves with one of the easiest schedules in the Big Ten. Buddy, you good? Give me a little thumbs up. Yeah, let's go. All right.
Going on.
What's
up?
Let's go. All right. So, and look, this is, I'm glad that Bud, perfect timing here because that is like an old Budism right there, is that Rutgers has a tough schedule because Rutgers can't play Rutgers. But yet, Rutgers has one of the easiest schedules in the Big Ten. Their non-conference does include a trip to ding, 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 ding. It does include a trip to Lane Stadium to play Virginia Tech. But it's other than that, it is Howard at home. It is Akron at home. When they get into the Big Ten play, hey, let's go look for an Ohio State. Oh, there's no Ohio States. Hey, let's go look for a Michigan. Nope. Don't see any Michigans either. Well, surely they gave them a Penn State, right? No, there's no Penn States on this here. Okay, all right. Well, at least they got an Oregon. Nope, there's no Oregons either. Like Tom, how is this Greg Schiano? Like the other side of being the whistleblower on Connor Stallions is that he gets an easy draw for the 2024 Big Ten season.
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that.
What do we make of this this fortunate draw for the Scarlet Knights?
I mean, while you were in prison last week, I wrote my Cinderella story where I picked one team from each power league that could be the Cinderella like surprise playoff run. But my criteria was they had to have a win total on the year 7.5 or less. And Rutgers was my choice for the Big Ten simply because of what you just mentioned. Like since joining the league, Rutgers has been in the East and it's had its skull caved in every single season by Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. And the Big Ten said, listen, you brought us a lot of cable boxes, which brought us a lot of revenue all these years, even if you didn't win many games. And a lot of the time we just watch you get destroyed. We want to reward you and thank you for the last decade of service by taking all 3 of those teams off your schedule this year. And just in case that's not enough, you don't have to play Oregon either. Like I saw in the chat, somebody asked if at Virginia Tech, their non-con game will be the toughest game they play all season. I don't think that's the case, but I think it's a legitimate question that you have to look through to make sure. Like, I would argue at Nebraska will be tougher and at USC will be tougher. But it is. And again, we have to put it in the context of it's Rutgers. So it's not like, oh, Rutgers is going 10-2 against these fools, but it's for Rutgers. This is a very easy schedule that they need to take advantage of. And I think that, this is a team, they got to a bowl game with 6 wins for the first time in a decade last year. And I think if you're Rutgers going into 2024, looking at this schedule, if you don't get back to a bowl game, it was probably a disaster of a season. Like, they could be, now that the West is gone, I look at Rutgers in 2024 as possibly this year's Iowa, in that they just win 8 or 9 games while scoring 16 points per game.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really probably how it plays out for them. They think they upgraded with quarterback. That's a little hard to believe with Kaliakmanis, but Wimsatt was really there's some chance Kaliakmanis is like not actually effective, but he's just not disastrous. Mm-hmm. And that you could take that, parlay it with a very experienced defense. Maybe you hit on some of the transfers on the offensive line. I like how this sets up. Like, they catch Minnesota, Rutgers gets a bye. That's a back-to-back road shot for Minnesota. Like, there are some tricky spots here where Rutgers catches it nice. Now, the middle of the schedule, that's kind of a grind. Like you have to go play USC on short rest. Like, if I'm Rutgers, I would rather travel to go play USC on short rest than at UCLA on short rest, because I don't think I can beat USC short rest, full rest, double rest, whatever, right? Like that's just a different level of athlete on the field.
But that's an 8:00 local kickoff,
mm-hmm. Right? So body clock,
so and they get the bye on the back end. So like, even if it's at least not a situation where you got slated with the 11 p.m. local time, and then you also have to play 7 days later. Like, that's another advantage.
I get that rebuilt Washington team at home on a Friday night on short rest. Like, that's pretty awesome. Doesn't have amazing depth this year is Michigan State. I get to play them the last game of the year. Yet last year, Penn State got that, and we were all over betting Penn State in that game, even though the number was kind of silly. And like, Michigan State was flat as hell, and nobody showed up for that crowd, right? Like, isn't that game in the Dome, or is Michigan State not doing that again this year?
You mean it's a Ford Field, like when they moved it?
No,
to Ford
Field? It's at Spartan Stadium. Although maybe they did move it. It's listed at Spartan Stadium, but I don't know for sure.
I mean, I think this team can make a bowl for sure.
Oh no, I want to do you one better, because right now at FanDuel Sportsbook, make every moment more. The over/under win total for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights is 6.5, but the over, if you want to dance with it, is plus 128.
Are we a Rutgers pod now?
I mean, what games are they for sure dogs in? Like at the
I'm
Hokies.
guessing you've got it pulled up with
at Hokies,
numbers,
yeah.
right?
Probably like definitely at Nebraska.
Yeah. At USC.
Yeah.
And that right
at
now,
Maryland, I think they're probably still a dog. Assuming Maryland has quarterback.
But even that's like a 2.5 to 3 point dog.
Yeah, because Maryland home field's what, like 1.5? So
at most,
and they'll be dealing with low totals, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Like the spreads can only be so big if the total is 39.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. That's that again. I think Rutgers. Any other easy slates in the Big Ten? That was just the one that popped right off the screen for me.
There were Minnesota got a hard one, right?
Hard-ish, yeah.
Iowa's easy.
Iowa's way easy. The Big Ten West, it's like, hey, welcome to playing a real schedule, except for Iowa. Like, somebody forgot to schedule Iowa a Big Ten East schedule. Have you seen who they play?
I mean, yes. But I feel like compared to Purdue and UCLA, they weren't quite there.
I think Iowa is pretty cakewalk. Like, there is a real chance that Iowa, to steal a basketball term here, is a bid thief, right? For the conference title. Like, if the loser of Oregon, Ohio State, if they lose one extra game, there's a real chance they don't make the conference title game because Iowa's sitting there at 8-1. I mean, they
But
play.
then do you trust Iowa to be able to take the next step to steal said bid? Because I could see an Iowa team that doesn't have the number of quality wins. They lose in the Big Ten title game, getting jumped by an Oregon or an Ohio State or a Michigan.
I meant bid thief for the Big Ten title game.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So they play Minnesota at Ohio State, Washington, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland, Nebraska. So they play one of the best 5 teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And the only bad team they miss is Purdue.
You know who's scheduled to me is low-key easy? And there's like, it's in context of who they are, but Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
Like their non-con is Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall. Okay, how many of those 3 games do you guys plan to watch? I might catch a series or 2 before
If they're on CBS.
Well, Tom, the Akron game's on CBS.
Well, I mean, outside of the Akron game on
Right.
August 31st at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Yeah.
Surprise, Tom is live blogging.
But then they open Big Ten, like they open at Michigan State and Big Ten. They get Iowa at home. Like you look, yes, they've got Oregon on the road, Penn State on the road, and Michigan on the road. And those are 3 difficult games. I am not diminishing any of those. But the rest of the schedule, I think they're winning by 2 scores every single week at minimum.
I would only say that relative. I would only agree with you if we say relative to who they are. If the average Big Ten team faces Ohio State's schedule, it is a difficult schedule. But I understand there's only 3 games on this schedule sort of point here.
Mm-hmm.
The way it sets up is also pretty cush. So Akron, Western Michigan, a much needed bye week, Marshall, Michigan State, Iowa, then you go to Oregon. Like that. I don't love Iowa before Oregon because Iowa will bang with you. Like they won't score,
Right.
but they will. But still, like that's like a 6-week run up where you don't have to show a damn thing on offense to Oregon's defense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we'll see on that. Meanwhile, Chip Kelly, he knows what Lanning wants to run on defense. I'm sure Lanning kind of knows what Chip Kelly wants to run because they faced each other before as Pac-12 coaches. Then you get a bye week, Nebraska at home, which I think Nebraska's improved, but that's not really a sweat for Ohio State, I don't believe. Then at Penn State. Then for the Michigan game, I get Purdue, a very tough trip to Northwestern, and then Indiana before Michigan. So I got 3 weeks to get healthy and get ready for that game when the Wolverines come to Columbus.
It's like a lot of hamstring injuries in those 3 weeks.
Do they play any games back to back in which they are less than a 3-score favorite?
No.
3-score might be aggressive when you're talking about like the Nebraska game, right?
You don't think they're like 17 to Nebraska?
I think they will be at home
in Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it'll largely depend on how Dylan Raiola adapts, how quickly. Yeah,
well,
I think most likely, yes.
And look, one of the great joys of the 2024 season is the hand wringing when they don't cover those spreads.
Mm-hmm.
This Ohio State team that's going to play with its food against teams that it should beat, and when they're winning by 14 instead of 20 points, and then we get to nitpick, and then Ohio State fans call us haters, and this is how the relationship starts. That's how it goes. All right, coming up on the other side, we turn our attention to the SEC, where arguably the most difficult schedule in the entire country awaits a coach under one of the most pressure-filled situations in the country. We'll get into all that and more next.
There's some new players in town, and they brought the plague.
You got my attention. You don't want that. What happened to Kingstown?
Mayor of Kingstown. New season now streaming exclusively on Paramount Plus.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast. And I hope you're following the Cover 3 podcast on Twitter, because when we were promoting the show this morning and we saw some of the responses, and some of the responses when they found out we were talking about the toughest schedules were just memes and gifs of Florida fans. Okay. Because that's exactly like you say, tough schedule to a fan, especially from the SEC, and their mind is going to go immediately to Billy Napier and the Gators. The non-conference, it includes Miami, it includes Florida State, and it includes the team with one of the best running back rooms in the entire country, according to Tom Fornelli. That would be the UCF Knights, led by Gus Malzahn. Those are not 3 W's at all. Samford rounds out the non-conference slate. Then you get into conference play, and of course they're going to play Georgia. Of course they're going to play LSU. They got Tennessee, and they got Texas, and they got Texas A&M and Ole Miss. But this is the toughest schedule in the country. Fair?
I think so. Yeah. Shoot, I forgot who said this on Twitter, so I can't give you credit, but if you DM me, if you remember who it was, I'll give you credit on the next show. This is the hardest schedule in the country by such an amount that the next toughest schedule in the country, USC, would have to play every single one of their games on the road to come close to the schedule difficulty.
Oh, from like the objective rating, like a schedule rating scenario?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there are certainly questions here, right? That you could poke some holes at this if you wanted to. The likelihood that all of these teams, the holes that we're going to attempt to poke in these teams all come true is very low. And thus the likelihood that Florida's schedule actually is really, really hard and one of the tougher schedules probably that we've ever seen is quite high. I mean, you get the best two teams in the SEC in Georgia and Texas. You get Ole Miss, who you got to have somewhere between 2 and 6 in the SEC. I would think LSU is no better than 8th.
Whoa.
Or sorry, no, excuse me. LSU is no better than or no worse than 8th, right?
Yeah.
A&M still has some athletes that can bang with you. Miami, this should be the best Miami team. Everybody I talk to says Cam Ward is like that dude, and is also like a great leader down there, which they felt like they really needed. Florida State will still be a really good team, I think. So, I mean, Tennessee in Knoxville, not easy.
I mean, all of November.
Kentucky returns like every single player that's ever played defense for them. UCF, yeah, this is very difficult.
Like the best way to put it is you've got two teams on your schedule that have won national titles in the last few years in Georgia and LSU. You've got another team on your schedule that was in the playoff last year in Texas. And then you've also got two teams from Florida who were undefeated regular season conference champions who got screwed over by the BCS in the playoff by being left out of it, in UCF and Florida State. So it's like you're trying to find the breather, and yes, there's Samford, which is in week 2. If I have this schedule, I would love to have Samford in the middle of November, not in week 2. There is no day off here. Every single week, like at Mississippi State, is going to feel like that's going to feel like a vacation game.
Yeah,
but it's in September.
But again, in September, from October on, you are just getting kicked in the face every single morning you wake up.
5 consecutive Fridays with preseason top 20 teams, I'll guess. And maybe LSU or Florida State or Ole Miss. I don't know where that's good, but Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State on 5 consecutive Saturdays in November at the end of the year with no breaks between them. Good.
Also, if you could place the bye week or the 2 bye weeks where you wanted it, I'm pretty sure you don't want it after Mississippi State between USF, and I don't think you really want it in front of Georgia. Like, I think I'd rather just take my ass beaten Georgia, Texas back to back, excuse my language, and then take a break and regroup against a team that I feel like I have a better chance of beating, like an LSU, Ole Miss, maybe in Tallahassee, something like that, right? I don't think you're going to beat Georgia regardless of how much time off.
Yeah. What else jumps out from the rest of the SEC as it pertains to the difficult schedules?
I mean, everybody's got a difficult schedule. Did you see the list from ESPN's FPI of the most
entirely SEC Big Ten?
Yeah, the entire top 10 was the SEC.
Yeah.
I have some quibbles with that. Like I respect what the FPI guys do. I think they're pretty smart dudes, and I understand their process. Some of those bottom SEC teams I don't think are very good, but we'll see. I did think Greg Sankey's politicking at spring meetings was interesting. If Greg Sankey had his way, the media would blindly think that every SEC team has a schedule like Florida. But the teams that it's probably going to come down to the committee needing to judge their schedule strength with their win-loss, I think it's teams like Missouri and Ole Miss. And those team schedules are actually a lot easier. And Missouri not tough, but they're not like Ole Miss. Think about who they miss on their schedule, right? It's yes to they get Georgia, no Texas, right?
No Bama.
no Tennessee. I mean, you're getting LSU, South Carolina, Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Arkansas and Florida. The only bad SEC team you miss is Vandy. Like, I don't think Ole Miss can get in at 9-3. Like, I think they had better damn sure go 10-2 because they don't have a non-conference that's going to impress anybody either. I mean, Middle Tennessee State is awful. I don't think Wake can make a bowl. So, and that is a road game at Wake. Like, I think theirs is easy. I think Missouri's, Tom. I mean, if you look at Missouri's, it's also pretty. If Missouri is what Missouri fans think that team is, they should cakewalk this thing.
Going back to Ole Miss, I think one thing we need to consider is, like, just as far as, like you mentioned, like an at-large berth, I feel like timing is going to matter a lot too. Like, because you know how recency bias affects everything.
yeah.
And if you look at Ole Miss's schedule, it is it is easier to start the season, not a cakewalk. But like you look up and through that road game against South Carolina, I look at Ole Miss and I say, man, they should probably win every single one of these games. But then you get in a 4-game span, you get at LSU, Oklahoma, at Arkansas, Georgia. So say they start off like 6-0, they're ranked in the top 10, and then they lose those games to like Oklahoma and Georgia in back-to-back weeks. That could drop them a few spots when you're at the time in November where the rankings are really going to start to matter. And then will a win over Florida, which is probably going to be, a bad team by that point because it's been murdered by its schedule, or a win against the Mississippi State team in the Egg Bowl be enough to vault you into an at-large bid? That's going to be something worth watching. But as far as Mizzou, yeah, I think you can make the very solid argument that compared to most SEC teams and most SEC schedules, this is a year that the Tigers really need to take advantage of. And I think that, you mentioned it, but like the way they've gone about this offseason, I think they know that too.
Yeah,
and I think that's kind of the approach, because like non-conference, Murray State, Buffalo, BC. You guys won the Cotton Bowl. You better win those games by a lot. You open with SEC play with Vandy at home. You better win that game by a lot. So you're going into your bye. You're 4-0. You've been cruising. At Texas A&M will be tough, but then you get UMass on the road a week later, so you can recover from that if you lose. Then it's Auburn, Alabama, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Mississippi State. There's no Georgia. There's no Tennessee. There's no Texas. It's like there's always tough games on an SEC schedule, but as far as the teams and the breaks you can catch, I think Missouri caught a few breaks with this one.
Okay, so I want to put Alive in Tucson's
I got you.
question. Sorry. This is sort of what I want to point out here. The logic implied in the question of who is getting in over a 3-loss SEC team. Not all SEC teams are going to be created equal with 3 losses. There are some SEC teams for which I would definitely argue to be in the playoff at 9-3. And there are some that I would not. Like, let's take a look at Missouri's schedule. What is the best argument for them to be in with 3 losses on this schedule?
Because if it's not the ones that they're supposed to lose to, they're bad losses.
Then you're losing to really bad teams. Like Oklahoma's projected to go 7-5, guys. Like, that's an unranked team. A&M may end up ranked. Auburn, maybe. Like, it's Bama. Arkansas's got like a win total like 4. Mississippi State, same. Vandy, no. Like,
yeah, like if you look at their toughest games and they lose them all, say they lose to A&M, Alabama, Oklahoma, what's your best win?
Right. Then they've got no quality wins.
Yeah, correct. Exactly.
So yes,
I think 10-2, I think they may have an argument, because I actually think it is important to acknowledge teams that are sort of in that like 25 to 45 range. There is some difficulty in that, even if they don't have a arbitrary cutoff number of a top 25 next to their names. But I don't see this 9-3 stuff with Ole Miss or Missouri. Like, those are the two kind of pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. All SEC schedules are created equal and all are equally tough, right? Like,
I think we could be pretty secure in the idea that the first 3-loss team to get an at-large berth will be an established brand blue blood kind of program.
Yeah.
It's not
like
going to be
if Florida goes 9-3.
Oh my God.
Yeah. If you go 9-3 against that slate, you're in to me.
Let's go.
If Florida goes 9-3, name them national champions. No.
Yeah. Like, if Texas goes 9-3, they should be in. They played a real non-conference game.
This was
at Michigan, right?
Yeah. Barry at 8:17 a.m. got things started. He was saying Florida is the toughest, though fans will still have a hard time accepting 8 wins would be a successful year. Here's the part I thought was interesting. What would you guys set the over-under for the number of wins for a top 10 team against the schedule? The Florida schedule with all of the murderers row that we laid out. What do you think an average top 10 team would do against that?
I would say like 8-4 juice under.
Yeah.
Right?
I was talking to Bill Connolly, and he had an average top 5 team as going 9-3 against Florida's schedule. So I'd say top 10. Let's add an extra loss, maybe 7-5, more likely than 9-3.
Yeah.
If Florida goes 8-4, extend Billy Napier for like
For real.
Yeah.
Good gravy. Yeah. That's all right. Any other tough ones in the SEC we want to highlight?
No, the SEC is a cakewalk.
Boomer Sooner.
Boomer Sooner.
Mhm.
It is not particularly friendly, I would say, as a welcome gift to the conference. If I can pull it up on my sheet here. Here we go. It is
That Temple game is really no.
I mean, Temple, Houston, Tulane to start. First game is Tennessee. Good luck with that. At Auburn as your follow-up game in the SEC. Not a super easy place to play. I mean, if you're like a legit top 5 team, I don't think this Auburn team gives you a whole lot of trouble. But if you're more in that like kind of 15 to 28 range, which is sort of where I think Oklahoma probably is, a little more difficult to play on the plains. Neutral site against Texas. You get South Carolina at home. That's helpful. Got to go to Ole Miss the week after. And you get Maine mixed in there. That's a nice little.
Watch out for the Bears. Rah.
And then,
Oklahoma adapted to that SEC life quick. Just
At
sneaking an
Missouri,
FCS team in November.
So they get Tennessee, Texas, Bama, LSU, Missouri, and Ole Miss. And the problem is, like, this is probably the best Tennessee, Missouri, and Ole Miss teams that we've seen in at least a decade.
I mean, we talked about Ole Miss. They have handled their business as though they know. And they're pushing it all in here, and you're not going to get an Ole Miss at this place probably for more often than not. I thought, and it similar to the question about what would the average top 10 team do if they're, and this is like Ohio State, if they weren't Georgia's schedule would be tough. If you had to play Clemson, at Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss, and Tennessee, it's a pretty tough schedule. It's just your Georgia. So no one's crying for you.
I agree.
Mhm.
I'm interested in how much scouting Kirby and those guys have already done on what DeBoer wants to run. You think about it, who used to work for Kirby, who faced DeBoer twice last year and lost both times? Dan Lanning.
Mhm.
So they call a very similar defense. Georgia has better players, so that they can execute a little bit better than Oregon can. And also, Bama's offensive talent is nowhere near what Washington had last year in terms of like physical maturity and that type of stuff. Long term, maybe. That'll be an interesting one. This is a tough schedule, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like if it was not Georgia, a team that we have as somebody will put Ohio State as their number 1 team on their preseason ballot. I understand. But Georgia's the preseason number 1 team, right?
For me, yeah.
For me, yeah.
Yeah. I would predict that will come out in the consensus. There will be an Ohio State camp, but I just don't see a lot of flaws. And I don't have a lot of question marks.
I mean,
They do have a very nice run up to the SEC title game, assuming that they clinch. I mean, they will clinch well before Thanksgiving. Tennessee is the last ball game, and it's in Athens. And then they get UMass and Georgia Tech. And they moved Georgia Tech to a Friday, so they actually get an extra day for the SEC title game.
I thought Kirby loves being able to get that over with. Yeah.
I mean, that's
going
a nice schedule for the SEC title game prep purposes.
Right.
To the number 1 thing, I feel like if you look at their rosters at everywhere but quarterback, Ohio State's got a pretty good argument to be the number 1 team. But for me, it's just the quarterback situation. One has Carson Beck, and one has, I guess, Walker Howard. Will Howard. Walker Howard, Will Howard, or maybe not Will Howard. I don't know. They haven't named a starter yet.
I mean, if you went like unit by unit, secondary Ohio State, linebacker definitely Georgia, D-line Ohio State, like slightly.
Offensive line Georgia.
Major Georgia.
Tight ends Georgia because they've got Oscar Delp.
Running backs Buckeyes.
Receivers Buckeyes. Quarterback Georgia.
I think receiver could be close, but I mean, if Jeremiah plays like they think he can, then Georgia doesn't have a guy who has that ceiling. We just don't know at which point he will hit that ceiling.
I do think, like we're debating, but I think if you were to take every single possible title game scenario, I think the most likely outcome is Georgia versus Ohio State.
Yeah.
Man, We're doing the thing. We're only talking about the Super 2. Dadgummit.
They're
All
good.
right. Do we want to blow through the last little bit, or
You want to do the easiest schedule? I did
Oh,
not
e-
open the doc yet. Like I literally just got back and threw on a polo.
easiest schedule in the SEC? I've got Missouri.
Yeah.
Who do you have as the easiest in the ACC?
Syracuse, I think.
I've got Syracuse and Virginia Tech.
I also think NC State's is kind of low key, easy-ish too. But yeah, Syracuse for me. That's why I also had them in that Cinderella post with Rutgers, largely because of that schedule. Like I do think Kyle McCord is an upgrade at the QB spot. I think they've got a little more depth at the receiver spot. I think they're just gonna be a better passing team. And I think with that schedule, Syracuse could make more noise than maybe people expect.
Yeah, your toughest in the ACC, traditionally, Georgia Tech is always going to be up there. It's really tough when you're going to have to play Clemson and Georgia every single season. I think so, right? Isn't Clemson still a primary rival for Georgia Tech?
I think so.
I've just gotten so used to them having the toughest schedule that it's like almost a rhythm for me.
I think I have the easiest schedule in the country.
Oh, it's Liberty.
Liberty?
Yeah, it's Liberty.
That's
Because Liberty does not have to play Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, how did FIU show up on some of these strength of schedule rankings with one of the easiest schedules in the country? What is Mike McIntyre going to be able to do with one of the easiest schedules in the country? And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, because took over a program that was in really, really rough shape. So I understand that there's a bit of a curve here, but some of my easiest among all the group of five that I labeled Liberty, clearly. And then I had FIU and then Toledo, with Toledo being that position where, hey, well, that is a team that could take advantage of having an easy non-conference and an easier draw within the MAC.
Do we think that Liberty will play more than one game decided by single digits?
Yes, but they might not have preseason spreads of such. That's college football being college football. Playing a random night on a Wednesday in Murfreesboro, yada, yada, yada.
Like if they win at App on September 28th, they got a really good shot to go back to the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Somebody said that they're going to win a game in the playoff. As for a bold prediction, you got it, bro. Let's go.
You were drunk. That's why you were in jail. You weren't in jail. You were in rehab. After making that comment, we realized that Chip had a problem that he needed to deal with.
So
Hey,
if they're five, they're probably 12. The 5 is probably Big Ten loser or SEC loser.
And that was the other theory, is that you're going to be playing 10 days after the loser of the championship game. They're going to be at home, but they're going to be mad that they didn't win. Are you going to catch them in that kind of position? Like it was, who did Illinois beat in the Big Ten title game in basketball this year?
Oh, Wisconsin.
And then Wisconsin turned around and just laid an egg in their first round game in the NCAA tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Like you poured it out for this, big run, and then it's kind of hard to reload the musket.
I see these people trying to galaxy brain this take on Twitter, and there is some truth to it that the 5 seed is a pretty cush seed because you're getting a home game against most likely the G5 champ, and you'll be favored by,
and your quarterfinal plays into
24.
Your quarterfinal is going to play into Big 12 or ACC. That's the other thing, is that you would then probably get a 3-4, or you would be getting the 4, which we're assuming is not going to be Big 10 or SEC.
But you would still want the bye.
Yes.
Okay. Ask Mike Norvell if he would rather have played the Northern Alabama game or not. Right. Like injuries, even in these games that are not likely to be close, they still occur. Like it's still a collision sport, not a contact sport. And if you can get the bye, you want the bye.
Yep. Toughest schedule in the Big 12. None.
They're all the same.
No, there is some difference. I think it's Arizona State.
Ooh. Are you applying the context of where Arizona State is at to split the difference there?
No, they just got all the best teams in my opinion.
Got it.
So Arizona State drew. They had the weird hard road trip. So they go at Texas Tech, which I think people don't really like doing there. They get Kansas, they get Utah, then they go to Cincinnati, which is like, that's kind of a weird spot to have to go to Cincinnati after you play Kansas and Utah. Then they go to Oklahoma State. They do get to host UCF. They're at Kansas State. They host BYU, and then they're at Arizona. So I think that's 5 roadies, which again, if you track Big 12, you got to count 5 home or 5 road.
Mhm.
And then they play all of the Big 12 favorites, I think. Like everybody who's 15-1 or better. Did I miss anybody? Kansas, Utah, Kansas State, and Arizona. Yeah. And UCF is like probably everybody's favorite sleeper there. So Arizona State, difficult. Oh, and they get Wyoming and Mississippi State and Texas State in the non-conference.
Mm-hmm.
Like
I've got
they
West
could start
Virginia.
0-4, but and 0-1 in the Big 12.
West Virginia has Penn State in the non-con. Pitt, which I don't know. I mean, it could be easier. But then when they get into conference play, they do have to play Kansas State. They do have to play Arizona. They do have to play at Oklahoma State. They have to play Kansas, UCF at home, at Texas Tech at the end of the season. I saw a lot of the Big 12 kind of being close to about the same kind of like one didn't jump out at me, but West Virginia was the one that I jumped on as what I thought was the toughest one right there.
That is pretty damn tough too.
Mm-hmm. I just can't wait to watch the Big 12 because it's gonna
be fun.
All right, what about
ridiculous every
easiest?
single week?
What about easiest Big 12?
I think Utah has an argument, but again, I look at all these schedules and I agree. There's some that are tougher and some that are easier, but I think the gap between them is a lot like the teams themselves. It really isn't that much of a gap. But I look at Utah's, and you could argue, like a non-conference of Southern Utah, Utah State, and who else is their non-con on here?
Where is it?
They play 10 Big 12 games,
Oh,
I think, because they had a previously scheduled conference game, if I recall.
Is it
Oh,
BYU?
so it's like the BYU is technically a
BYU
non-conference
game?
game this year.
I thought it was Arizona,
Oh,
that's right. Yeah. Okay.
but I could be wrong on that.
Okay.
Well, anyway, you look at, I mean, obviously you can make the argument that Utah is the best team in the league, so therefore they don't have to play Utah. But like at Oklahoma State's tough. You get Arizona at home. Like the most of your tougher games, you're getting them at home. Iowa State's got to come to Salt Lake City. BYU's coming to Salt Lake City. TCU's coming to Salt Lake City. Arizona's coming to Salt Lake City. So it's just as far as Big 12 context, it's easier. But again, I think everybody's schedule in this league is very similar.
Yeah, Salt Lake City, which remains one of the best home field advantages in all of college football. So,
Mhm.
What record do you think you will need to have to get an at-large out of the Big 12?
11-1.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could see 11-2, but yeah.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Like if you lose the Big 12 title,
11-1 team shows up to the Big 12 title game. They're probably ranked 4th to 6th in the rankings going into it. And then they take a loss to the second best team in the conference. Second best team goes in, and now you're on the chopping block. But I think you've got a good argument against a 4th team from the Big 10 or the SEC. I would say so.
But I also think it depends too, like who's got the toughest non-conference games in the Big 12? Because I do think if you lose 2 games, even if one of them's your conference title game, you better have like a landmark non-conference win to stand on.
Check the start comments. Not one we should share, but if you want to get a little chuckle.
What? The one about Georgia Southern?
No, from Super J.
I
I just started. Click on over to the start tab.
Yeah.
I'll just show it. It's funny. Who cares?
Craig and Super J have been going at it in the chat for like a good 20 or 30 minutes.
Well, I'm going to side with Super J because Craig doesn't realize that Oscar Delp is a better blocker than.
Oh, wait, hold on. We're still bringing that up again. Oh, my God.
I think I have Oscar Delp muted on like Twitter, like TweetDeck mute, where it's just they're tagging me. I'm like, I'm not Tom.
Time will tell.
We'll see.
Right.
We'll see. I mean, you look at him in his T-shirt, and I'm just kidding. I can't go back. We can't bring it all back. All right. More summer school. Rest of the week.
I have, what do I have? 6 today. Oh, as far as, yes. I actually tweeted out the schedule. So let's see what we have. We have, come on, I know somebody hit retweet so I can find it. Tomorrow, Penn State with Daniel Gallen. Wednesday, NC State with Corey Smith. And then Friday, Oklahoma, Josh Callaway. And on Saturday, we get a little South Carolina with Hale. So it's going to be a really good time, man.
Love that. Everybody's been digging into the summer schools. And as Bud mentioned on the show, like, even covering the sport all the time, it is impossible to be able to get the depth that some of these experts, whose literal job is to think critically about these teams, and primarily these teams, all the time. You get perspectives that you're not going to get. You get levels of analysis that you're not going to get anywhere else. We find it's a tool not just for everybody here in the Cover 3 tailgate, but for us as well. So we love our friends at 24/7 Sports. We appreciate you, Bud, for leading the charge on that summer school rocking and rolling. Alive in Tucson, summer school has been really great this year. We appreciate you checking it out. Of course, if you want to add a question to a future mailbag episode, you can go leave us a 5-star review. And in that review, you can put your question. We'll throw it in the big old bag of mail, tackle it in a future episode. And you can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fernell. You can follow him at BudElliott3. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Something nice about Oklahoma.